We have patience. Hello.
Hi, how are
How
you?
are you? How are you, Sammy?
I'm very well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you flawlessly. You look wonderful. Where are you? This I see great vintage in the back.
Yes, I am currently in my office.
Not
Yes,
surprised.
so we
You're surrounded by great clothes.
got lots of clothes, lots of stuff going on in here, a lot of production. So, yeah,
Totally. And are you wearing your own line? I'm curious what you're wearing. You should
of
give us a
course.
sneak peek of your outfit.
I am wearing the 80s dress, one of
Oh,
my favorite dresses.
I love it.
Yeah.
Ooh, that cut. And is it velvet?
Yes, it's a vertical crushed velvet.
Oh, it's divine, especially like, I don't know, we don't have many opportunities to wear a fun dress like that these days. So I love that you just put it on for this occasion.
You know what? This is my this is my opportunity to wear it right now, so I went for it.
Well, I put on a little vintage. I'm wearing this like big vintage button down for the occasion to celebrate sustainability.
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, so let's dive in. We're here to talk about your collection launching on Forward, which we're so excited about. And as I mentioned to some of the readers at the beginning, or some of the viewers at the beginning, your line's sustainable, sourced from vintage materials. And I'm curious, I feel like with the pandemic, we've seen a shift where people want to know who they're supporting with their dollars, like, and people are shopping a bit more thoughtfully. Do you, so I want to hear in your words, when people are buying Sami Miro vintage, like who are they supporting? Like give us a little window into your business and your world.
Yes. So ever since I started Sami Miro Vintage in 2016, sustainability has been at the forefront of the brand, especially in a time where very few brands were focusing on that.
Yeah.
So when people shop Sami Miro Vintage, they are supporting a woman-owned company, a person of company, and a sustainable company. We've really always been about expressing ourselves and allowing people who are usually the minority being able to express themselves and the artistry and the beauty for kind of like the underdog.
Mm-hmm. I saw on your Instagram you posted that you were like, most people don't know, like it's just me and one other person like running this whole like very professional, legit scene. And I love to see that like insight because people think, when you're like this glossy brand that maybe you have a huge team and it's a big production. But I thought that was cool insight.
I was kind of like going back and forth. Should I post this? Like, should I let people really know, or should I not? Uh, because so many people think or assume that, I'm kind of just like the face of it, and then I have, a whole team like running the show behind me. But I come from like a business background and an entrepreneurial background in terms of my studies. So being an entrepreneur and running the show and really doing everything for the business has always been one of my biggest goals. And yes, it's just me and one other person. I have a new amazing sales team in Milan now. But in terms of everything else from like marketing, financials, production, the whole design, everything. It's just me and one other person. And it doesn't mean that it's easy. It means that, we're working like 7 days a week and insane hours. And we're both just very motivated and productive people. So we know how to get it done, but it's time to grow.
Yeah, those pains where you're like, I love this, it's my passion, but like, do I want it to consume me? I get it. It can be intense, especially when it's
Yeah.
your baby. So I also read that your supply chain, starts and ends in LA. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, like how you source and, from production?
Yes. So the supply chain being sustainable on top of the fabrics was always very important to me too, because that is, you know, like the main part that makes fashion a horrible industry for our environment and for our planet. So our supply chain, when I say starts and ends in LA, all of our fabrics and trims and everything is sourced in Los Angeles, and there's no like shipping from China, there's no shipping from Europe back and forth, and everything just is purchased here, and the product is made here, and then we ship it out from here.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people, I feel like if you're not like in the clothing industry, you don't realize that like there's a lot of like, oh, it's sent to across the world to this place to have that bit of it done, and then it's sent to this place to do the finishing, and then there can be a lot of I guess carbon footprint that goes into before a clothing even like arrives somewhere, and that's amazing that it's just staying keeping it local.
Yeah, keeping it local. I mean, LA has a lot of great options for manufacturing and for sourcing. It's obviously tremendously limited compared to what's available to the entire world. But because sustainability is my focus, I'm totally fine within working within my local means and
Mm-hmm.
not contributing to adding more damage to the planet versus and still being able to create something, creative and what's in my heart. And I don't feel like anything has been compromised because of that.
Yeah, I mean, from the consumer end, hell no, it's perfection. So, um, so one thing I want to talk about is I feel like sustainability used to have this reputation as being like kind of crunchy, like granola clothing. It wasn't seen as like prestige or luxury. And so it's interesting to me that, a luxury site like Forward is making it a priority to bring on, sustainable lines like yours. Do you see like a shift where like sustainable is the new luxury and like our ideas of luxury are being shaped and shifted?
I think that's a really great question. You're so right. Sustainable fashion brands are typically seen as like super basic, just like a t-shirt or a sweatshirt or, just very plain or crunchy granola hippie kind of vibes. And that was really, I think, like the biggest like barrier for me or misconception for SMV is I was always pushing like sustainable, sustainable, and people would just kind of like be confused because it doesn't look it looks like a beautiful clothing line, and it
Yeah.
doesn't like reek of the crunchy granola vibe. And so that was definitely like a hurdle that I had to cross in terms of like teaching the consumer that sustainable can still be beautiful. And I think that now as brands focus on that, and we're in dire need of everybody needing to create a sustainable foundation for their brands, that the consumer is finally starting to realize, I think like just now, that sustainable can still mean beautiful and intricate and interesting and different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it doesn't. It is true. It's like when you it's not different from other clothing that's not unsustainable, so like it makes it an easy choice, at least for me in my shopping. I'm like, oh, why wouldn't I go for the sustainable item that looks just as good as everything else and on the market, and yeah, it has that, aligns with my values, I guess. Okay, so I want to talk about the corsetry inspiration in the collection that's out now. I feel like I saw it with like some seaming and the V cuts, which, by the way, if anyone who's watching this has not seen your V cut tank, this is the perfect, like, just it's the perfect shirt that I'm beyond obsessed with it. It looks like a corset, but it's made out of like, like tank top, like a knit stretchy material. Correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Sammy, please. And so it's like comfortable, or I assume it is. I have not worn it yet. I will. But has this amazing reference to like corsetry, which is the opposite of comfortable usually. So I think I saw some of your references coming into play in this collection, and I'm curious where you find your inspiration.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. What I love about corsets is, the feminine shape that they give every female figure, no matter your shape or size or body type. And I really wanted to incorporate that theme into the whole collection, whether it was a corset or whether it was a sweatshirt or whether it was a
Mm-hmm.
t-shirt. And because the female figure has always been the main focus of all of the cuts and the shapes and structures of my pieces. And so we have a lot of V-cut shapes, like you mentioned, which really enhances the curvature of the female figure. It makes your waist look tiny and gives you hips and just makes you look like, like feel so good, even though it's just like a slight cut of a sweatshirt, for example. And also the seam lines, as you mentioned, we have open seam lines on a lot of the knit pieces, and it really just, even though it's just a tank top or a t-shirt, the intricate open seam lines, they add so much texture and so much beauty, and it creates I like to call these pieces creative staples or striking staples. Every woman, what was that?
Like a basic but better. Like you would wear it as much as you would wear your basics.
Exactly. And that's what I love to wear. I want to wear tank tops and t-shirts and sweatshirts all the time, but I want them to be striking and I want them to be different. And I feel like the women out there have really understood that and have gravitated towards it. And yeah, so the feedback has been really great.
I love it. We have a question here from Susan who wants to know what's your favorite piece in the collection?
Gosh. Uh,
Like picking among your children?
yeah, it's a tough question. I think it just depends on the mood that I'm in. Okay, I'm going to choose three pieces. Ooh, okay, I'll narrow it down to three later. I would say the V-cut hoodie is probably, not probably, it's my favorite piece ever. I love, like I said, just wearing like basic things, but doing it in a striking way. So the V-cut hoodie, it's just so flattering on every figure, and it's just different. Um, I love the asymmetric tee. It has all of the open seam lines, and it's just so like all of these pieces. I get asked questions, like why is this t-shirt $200? Because when you really look at all of the seam lines and there's so much work that goes into every single one of these pieces. So yes, it is a basic, but there's so much work that goes into it. And, it takes a lot of money to make one of those
Yeah.
and to make.
I think we're kind of getting into an era too where some brands are like actually showing the receipts of like, this is how much this costs, this is how much this costs. I take this tiny margin, and like people are really starting to understand, oh, this is what is built into actually like a quality product and what it takes to add up to that cost.
Right. And when you're a sustainable brand, I'm doing all my manufacturing here, and I care about there's no sweatshops over here. I'm paying people the prices that they deserve to be paid as human beings. And a lot of people don't realize that when they're buying a garment that is $10, the whole process that it takes to make the garment, to pay the person to ship it, and at retail it's still only $10, and they're making money off of that. When you really think about those prices, they're putting humans in such horrible conditions and paying them nothing, and that's what you're paying for when you buy fast fashion.
Yeah.
So when you are purchasing from a sustainable brand, it's not like the brand is trying to take a bunch of money from you for no reason. It's because we're paying more for the fabric, for the people who are making it. And there's a lot that goes into it.
If anything, you should like trust the ethics of somebody who's creating a sustainable brand like 10 times more than the fast fashion ones. Um, So I feel like historically on your site, like items go fast, right? Like people are watching the site and things drop and they like check out real quick. And if you miss it, you hesitate, it's gone. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be some of this like sellouts, vibe happening when the launch on Forward. I'm curious what piece you predict to be like the sellout queen.
Hmm. Well, so far, the sweatsuit has been the hottest commodity.
Okay.
Uh, the piece that a lot of amazing, influential women have worn and keep wearing, and so that one has sold out already on my website, and it just launched today on Forward. So I would presume that that one is going to be the biggest hitter.
The big winner. I mean,
Yeah.
the data's in about how it did on your site, and it's on Forward today. See the map, people. Head over there. um, obviously, you know, you before you launched your line, vintage has been your whole world for a long time, like sourcing vintage and things like that. Do people ever slide into your DMs with questions about vintage? And I'm curious what the most common question is people have for you and the answer to it.
A lot of people have questions about where I shop in LA. That's probably the biggest question in terms of vintage. But really, I think the question that I get asked the most is just more about entrepreneurship in general, and how do you do it by yourself, and like how do you know that what you're doing is right, and like I'm scared, or they've done their research on my story and how I come from the tech world, and then I just jumped into the fashion world because I wanted to like pursue a creative inkling. And I just like quit my corporate job where I had a steady income and just went on like a journey of exploration. And so a lot of people resonate with that story, and they have an idea, but they're afraid to quit their job because quitting your job without having one lined up is a scary thing. But my feedback is really just two things. One, if you are going to start a company, get ready to work your butt off. Get ready to never stop working. And you really have to love it, and it has to just be a huge part of you, because in order for it to succeed, you can't stop, and you can't rely on anybody else to do the work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so you have to, there's self-motivation is crucial.
Yeah.
And what's the other advice?
Well, I think what you said about you have to like really love it and the hours are actually more intense if you're going to take that leap and start your own company is interesting, because I think it's always the grass is always greener. So like people who work like, for someone else for a 9 to 5 or whatever, they're like, oh, you set your own hours, like you're in control, you can go on vacation when you want, sort of thing. And from what I hear, starting your own company is the opposite, where it's like your whole life's just devoted to it, at least for, a certain amount of time.
It sounds super glamorous, and it is, but it's not glamorous. You're having to wear so many hats, and just, yeah, and never stop working. So it's intense, but fulfilling.
Yeah, but I'm sure so rewarding. Yeah, totally. Someone asked, how did you find your niche and market it successfully? People are interested in your business. I love it.
How did I
Like the
find
business
my,
question.
and yeah, and what was the last part?
And how did you market it successfully? Like, how did you grow to where you are today, I guess?
The story with me and SMV is, it's all organic, and it's all just came from my authentic love of vintage and my desire to kind of bring in my personal creations and share them with the world. It really was, when I started SMV, it was a creative outlet. I didn't really plan for it to turn into what it has become. It just all, I'm a huge believer in, if you have an idea or an inkling, just to go for it and not to miss out on any opportunities. So I actually had a new intern who started yesterday, and we were talking about how, she's not really sure what she wants. She's in college right now. She's not sure what she wants to do with her life exactly. And I told her that the path that I've taken, I wasn't planning on necessarily being in tech. I wasn't planning on taking the job that I took, and I wasn't planning on now being in fashion at all. But I had different opportunities come along that I took and that molded me into the person that I am today. So, yeah.
That leap of faith. You know,
Yeah,
it's important. Our co-founder has a podcast called Second Life, and I feel like it's your second life. You know, where you just completely take the risk to follow the passion. I love it, and I do think that people sometimes want like an equation or something to follow, but I think when businesses and are started out of passion, it's the authenticity is just really clear. You know, like it's not like you're trying to like fit a trend that's happening right now or hit like a certain consumer demographic or like sort of manufacture this. It's just from the heart.
totally. That's so true.
We have another question. How do you keep your future designs unique? And I actually wonder about this a lot with designers. Like, there's quite a cadence of keeping up with and providing new and I guess mining your creative brain. How do you, stoke that creativity to come up with new future designs always and make sure that they're core to your brand, but also fresh?
Yeah. I take how I personally design uh, is with my one of one vintage pieces. So I'll find vintage from all over the world that are unique, and then I will completely rework them, add fabrics, change the shape and structure and the overall design so it becomes essentially a new piece. And then my favorite pieces of those, I mean, like all of these are one of ones. So there's, like hundreds and hundreds of one of ones here. And then the pieces that I find myself wearing consistently and the pieces that I find the girls who pull from me gravitating towards, I know that that's the one that I need to incorporate into my collection. So once I find that piece, I will, create the pattern from the reworked shape and the reworked garment that I have made and create the pattern and kind of bring it to life in a more like commercial way.
Mm-hmm. Love that. I mean, vintage is just so rich. And you did say people ask you where you vintage shop in LA. I'm curious if you will reveal a haunt or two of yours that you love.
Oh, that's a tough question.
Maybe that's for
uh,
the exclusive access.
I agree. I think so. But truly, I mean, every time I travel, I always make sure to dedicate X amount of hours within that trip to shop for vintage and to find really unique pieces. When I'm in LA, though, I do have these like gnarly houses that I go to where they just have like pallets and pallets and mounds of vintage, and I have to wear like gloves and a mask, which we all do nowadays. But
Yeah.
and that's where you dig, you spend like hours, a whole day there, and you find the gems in that. And that's what I like to do the most, because I rather not go into a curated place because I love the hunt. Most people don't want to spend hours digging through a huge mess. So them a more curated situation is much better, but for me, I want to be sweating and finding like things.
You want to dive into it. I love it. What city do you think around the world has really interesting vintage? LA is pretty good, I will say, in my opinion, and more affordable sometimes than other cities.
Yes. You know what's really funny? LA is definitely a hub for vintage because of the warehouses that I was just describing. And we have like the Rose Bowl, which is phenomenal. But I've been to Tokyo like several times, maybe 4 or 5 times. And Tokyo has incredible vintage. But here's the funny part. So I'll walk into a vintage store and they'll be like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, I live in LA. And they're like, oh, no way, we just came back from a huge shopping trip and everything in here is from LA.
And you're like, I traveled all this way.
Tell me that.
That's
But
funny.
true. I mean, LA really, really has phenomenal vintage. But I have, gems all over. Paris has really unique vintage. I love finding vintage that is um like specific to that country.
Mm-hmm.
Because LA is the hub for like American vintage, which is probably the most popularized version of vintage. But I love, like, for example, in London, there's one vintage store that I go to that has only pieces that are British. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll like army jackets and or British army jackets and and garments that are only made and worn in England. So yeah, I love finding those pieces so that way I know that it's specific to that region and they didn't go shopping in LA to find it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I feel like in Japan, a lot of vintage, they love the Americana stuff, so it's quite popular. But I love there, especially like getting like the isamiyaki and stuff like that. They like have so much of that. I'm a big Japan nerd, so you hit right on one of my interests there.
And
So, oh, go ahead.
even in a like a kimono, for example, like if you go vintage shopping in Tokyo, then they always have like a section of vintage kimonos and pieces from that era. And although the shape of it isn't necessarily something that like I would immediately put on, or the kimono um, in general, what is so beautiful to me with all of vintage is that if for example you find a piece that isn't necessarily your style, there's always something in it that makes it so beautiful and unique. So the kimonos are have the most beautiful fabrics and prints, and they're so vibrant and luscious. And so for me, if I go to Japan, I might like buy a kimono and then totally rework it so that I have that incredible fabric, but create it into like use that fabric for a garment that it would never be.
Right, totally. Like you just kind of can pick out and make it modern or make it however, fit within your style profile. So I think we're coming up on time. I feel like this has gone by so quickly. So I have one last question for you. Um, it might be an obvious one. What's next for Sami Miro Vintage? What do we have to look forward to?
I have a few very exciting collaborations coming out that I'm unable to share right now, but they will be coming out in the coming months and throughout the next year. And I think just, continuing to push for sustainability and being the go-to for being sustainable, but also creating beauty, wearable, unique pieces as well. So just growth and collaborations and yeah.
She's got a lot on her plate. I'm excited. Well, we have that to look forward to. But today we can shop your collection on Forward, which I'm
And
really
I'm also
excited to do.
excited. Forward has some pieces that I haven't even released on Sami Miro Vintage. So, like this dress, for example, it's
Mhm.
not on my website yet, but it is on Forward.
Okay, get the exclusive. And they have fast shipping, I'm just saying, not to be too pluggy, but they do. Well, thank you so much, Sami. This has been a real treat to chat with you today. Um, and thank you. Have a good rest of your Tuesday. And thanks everyone who tuned in.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Kat. It was a pleasure.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye.